So today is November 19th, and we will start with the homage to the Buddha 3 times. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. If you could bring a chair up closer. Okay, so we have been going through the Anguttara Nikaya Book of Ones, and last time I showed that in the group of suttas that we've been taking, there's actually repetition of the whole pattern over, I think, 3 sections. So it's really sufficient to examine in length only one of these sections. I think there's actually 4 sections here. So I call this section, this general section, the obstacles and aids to the wholesome, to the kusala. And this section seems to take off from the last sutta of the previous section, which deals with citta, the mind. And so this last sutta says that whatever qualities are wholesome, that partake of the wholesome, all have, actually it goes up to, it's actually the last pair of suttas. So whatever qualities are unwholesome, partake of the unwholesome, pertain to the unwholesome, all have mind as their forerunner. And then the positive counterpart to that says whatever qualities are wholesome, partake of the wholesome, pertain to the wholesome, all have the mind, the citta, as their forerunner. So mind is said to arise first, followed by either the unwholesome or wholesome qualities. And of course, this statement shouldn't be taken too literally. It doesn't mind that citta arises at this second, then a few seconds later, unwholesome or wholesome qualities arise. The point seems to be that it is the mind, the general quality of the mind, or particularly the factor of, we call it decision, determination, inclination, that directs the mind either to the unwholesome or to the wholesome. Or if we want to use a Pali word, we could specify this as the cetana, that is the volition or the intention. It's a factor of the mind, and it steers the mind as sort of like the steering wheel of the mind. So with the steering wheel of the car, you can go either left or right. So with the steering wheel of intention, this very powerful and important factor of the mind, one can direct the mind either towards the unwholesome or towards the wholesome. Okay, so these 2 suttas I see as kind of transition point from the section on the citta, the mind, into the next section, which focuses on what I call the obstacles to the wholesome, or those factors that incline the mind towards the unwholesome and obstruct the wholesome, and then those factors which obstruct the unwholesome and direct the mind to the wholesome. And so these suttas are laid out in successive pairs, each pair revolving upon a pair of qualities which are either obstacles, the causes of the unwholesome and obstacles to the wholesome, or causes of the wholesome, obstacles to the unwholesome. And so last time we went through 4 of these pairs: heedlessness on the unwholesome side, heedfulness on the wholesome side, laziness versus the arousal of energy, the awakening of energy, strong desire or abundance of desires, as opposed to fewness of desires. What would be a simple term for fewness of desires? Contentment actually comes separately, you see. Excuse me? Paucity. Paucity. Well, paucity usually means poverty. Frugality might be a good word. Okay, frugality. Okay, then we come to non-contentment or discontent versus contentment. So these 4 we already discussed in the last class.
I think I read a footnote earlier in the book on fewness of desire.
Yeah.
And strong desire. I think the footnote said the meaning was you don't want people to know.
Yeah, we discussed it last time actually, with reference to that passage. Yeah.
That would be that modesty.
Modesty also, you could say. Okay. Okay, so now we come to the sections or the qualities, the pair of qualities that we didn't discuss. And so the first of these is careless attention versus careful attention. And this is a very rough translation of, let us just take the positive quality, since the negative quality is just the negation of this. Oh, I don't even have to write on the whiteboard now with this. So the positive quality is called yoniso manasikara. Okay, so first to take the literal meaning of this expression, first the word yoniso. Yoniso is an ablative formation, functioning, excuse me. Functioning adverbally here as an adverb in relation to manasikara. And so yoniso is based on the word yoni. And perhaps the original meaning of yoni is the womb, the mother's womb. Then it also comes to have an extended meaning of the vagina. So this is a meaning it has in a lot of the Indian iconography. But then it takes on an extended meaning of yoni as being the source or origin of something. And so there is a classification in the Buddhist discourses of the 4 yonis, which are the 4 modes of origin of sentient beings. So what are the 4 yonis, 4 modes of origin? There's birth from eggs. So here the egg is considered a yoni, because it's the origin of those beings like insects, birds, fish that are born from eggs. Then the second one is the womb. A different word is used for the womb to indicate those beings that are born by being carried in the womb by the mother and then discharged from the womb. Then the third mode of origin is said to be moisture. So certain beings are said to be born from moisture, though actually with modern scientific understanding, beings that are born from moisture are actually born from eggs too. It's just that the eggs are so small that we don't see them with the naked eye. And then the fourth yoni or mode of origin is spontaneous birth. This is the beings who are reborn, especially in the case of the heavenly realms, the hell realms. So those beings just arise immediately, directly, without any kind of a medium through which they're born. So those are four yonis, four origins of living beings. Okay, but here we have yoniso, an adverbial expression, so it can be taken literally to mean from the origin or by way of origins. But I wouldn't push too literal a translation. I think by the Buddha's time, or maybe with the Buddha himself, the word seems to take on the meaning of the way I would understand it as thoroughly, starting from the root and taking something all the ways through. Some have rendered it as wise attention. And I think this also could be considered accurate, but I don't like to use wise attention because that brings too much of an overlap with wisdom, and wisdom, panya, is a separate quality that develops from yoniso manasikara.
I'm wondering, because you said pause, could it be like, I'm just thinking, like investigative, where it's like trying to get at the cause? Is that the meaning?
I don't think necessarily that is necessarily the meaning. I have passages that I'll be discussing. So it's good to hold questions till I stop and ask for questions. Okay, so I've experimented with several renderings. I think in the translation of the Majjhima Nikaya, I may have taken this from Venerable Nyanamoli, wise attention. But now I prefer careful or thorough attention. And the word here, manasikara, in the Abhidhamma system of explanation, and also in some passages in the sutta, manasikara can be taken to signify attention as a particular mental factor that has the function of directing the mind to an object. So, for example, if I'm speaking or sitting here, suddenly there's a loud sound someplace, then my mind turns from what I'm engaged in to that loud sound. What is that sound? So that turning of the mind to the object is manasikara in this very narrow and specific sense. Or if we're going to, say, practice mindfulness of breathing, then our mind is engaged in other things, we sit down, then it's manasikara that directs the mind or turns the mind from everything else to the breath. So that's manasikara in this narrow, specific sense, which figures prominently in the Abhidhamma as one of the 7 universal mental factors. And we also find this use in the suttas. But in the passages on yoniso manasikara, I would now give to manasikara a broader sense than just this specific act of turning the mind from one thing to another object. And to see some of the passages that, or to try to get at the functional meaning of yoniso manasikara, I wanted to take a few passages that from the text that show how yoniso manasikara operates within its particular context. Okay, there is a passage, it comes in the Samyutta Nikaya. Here it's on the connected discourses on the factors of enlightenment, the Bojjhanga Samyutta. Okay, so in this passage, the opposite, careless attention, ayoniso manasikara, superficial attention, is said to be the condition for the arising of each of the 5 mental hindrances. And then the opposite is careful attention, yoniso manasikara, which is said to be the condition for the arising of each of the 7 factors of enlightenment. And then I just took some examples to show this. So here it is said that the nutriment, the Buddha asked, what is the nutriment or condition for the arising of unarisen sensual desire and for the increase and expansion of arisen sensual desire? Okay, then he says there is the sign of the beautiful, or the, more naturally we could say, the beautiful features of things. And then frequently giving ayoniso manasikara, careless attention to this. That is the nutriment for the arising of unarisen sensual desire and for the increase and expansion of arisen sensual desire. Okay, and so usually when the text speaks about sensual desire, what they have in mind specifically is sexual desire. And the sign of the beautiful is the beautiful features of things that stimulate and provoke and that strengthen the arising of sexual desire. And since the Buddha here, he's speaking to monks, and so this instruction is particularly relevant to those who have taken to observe the brahmacharya as the life of celibacy. So if, say, a monk sees at the temple or outside on alms round, beautiful woman, and then starts focusing on the nice hair, the sweet face, the nice smile, the nice figure. So this is giving careless attention or superficial attention to the sign of the beautiful. And by giving careless attention to those features, then sensual desire will arise, or arisen sensual desire will become stronger. And then the way to dispel that sensual desire would be giving yoniso manasikara, giving careful attention or thorough attention to what is called the asubha nimitta, that is the sign of the unbeautiful, the sign of the unattractive nature of the body. So this would be focusing on, the hairs of the head from a different angle, not the beautiful curves coming down, but just as if you've cut off the hairs of the head and you have a handful of the hairs in your hand and are looking at them not very beautiful. You want to get rid of them. Well, some men keep the the lock of hair in the envelope in their desk and think, oh, my beloved, if she would only be mine. Okay, but then passing down to the skin, the muscles, the bones, the organs, the tissues, the fluids. So that is the way to dispel arisen sensual desire. Okay, then we come to the yoniso manasikara as a condition for the arising of the 7 factors of enlightenment. And I took as an example of this just the first factor of enlightenment, which is mindfulness. And so it's said that there are things, dhammas, that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of mindfulness, and frequently giving careful attention to them is the nutriment for the arising of the unarisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness, and for the fulfillment by development of the arisen enlightenment factor of mindfulness. Okay, so what are the the things that are the basis for the enlightenment factor of mindfulness? You could think of 4 of them right off the bat. That was a big hint. What are they? Four things that are the basis for the arising of the unarisen factor, the unarisen mindfulness factor of enlightenment. Exactly. So these are what we call the 4 bases of mindfulness: the body, feelings, states of mind, and dhammas, or mental phenomena. Okay, the commentary will mention other things. We don't have to go into them now. We're not really discussing the factors of enlightenment, but the focus is just on wise attention. So giving wise attention, careful attention to these things becomes the cause for the arising of the enlightenment factor of mindfulness. And what I found interesting and a bit perplexing, though yoniso manasikara is mentioned, I'll stand up so everybody can see me, and I could see everybody. You know, yoniso manasikara, it's mentioned so often in the texts in various applications, and the Buddha gives so much attention to it. He stresses its importance so much. But apart from a few stock passages like that in relation to the 5 hindrances, the 7 factors of enlightenment, we don't find a clear explanation of exactly what is meant by yoniso manasikara. And apart from these few applications where we find only these few applications where yoniso manasikara is mentioned by name. But I think that there are a number of other passages which would show yoniso manasikara in action, particularly since the passage in the Anguttara Nikaya speaks of yoniso manasikara as a cause for preventing unarisen, unwholesome states from arising, and as a cause for bringing about the arising of unarisen wholesome states. I found a few other passages which, though the word yoniso manasikara doesn't occur here, but it seems to illustrate practical applications of yoniso manasikara. Okay, so I found one passage in Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 19. In this passage, the Buddha is speaking about the training that he took upon himself, the training of the mind, during the period when he was still a bodhisattva, striving for enlightenment. This is before his enlightenment. So he says, when I was striving for enlightenment, he actually uses here, when I was a bodhisattva, but I've rendered it a little more freely here. If a thought of sensual desire, or a thought of ill will, or of harming arose in me, I understood thus, this thought of sensual desire has arisen in me. It leads to my own affliction, the affliction of others, the affliction of both. It obstructs wisdom, causes difficulties, and leads away from Nibbana. So I would take this kind of reflection to be an illustration of yoniso manasikara. And so I would even perhaps render, if I were to be translating now, render manasikara in these kind of contexts, not so much as attention, but as reflection or consideration. Okay, so then the passage continues that when I reflected in this way, when I understood in this way, this leads to my own affliction, then that thought subsided in me. When I considered this leads to the affliction of others, it subsided in me. It leads to the affliction of both, the thought subsided in me. When I considered this obstructs wisdom, causes difficulties, leads away from Nibbana, it subsided in me. And so whenever a thought of sensual desire, ill will, or harming arose in me, then in this way, by using this reflection, I abandoned it, removed it, did away with it. Okay, then, so that shows this kind of careful or thorough attention, reflection, being a method for preventing unwholesome thoughts from arising and abandoning, removing unwholesome thoughts whenever they arise. And then the converse, how that kind of reflection brings the arising of wholesome thoughts or the strengthening of wholesome thoughts. So whenever a thought of renunciation or goodwill or non-harming arose in me, I understood thus. This thought of renunciation, goodwill, non-harming has arisen in me. This does not lead to my own affliction, to the affliction of others, to the affliction of both. It aids wisdom, does not cause difficulties, and leads to Nibbana. So if I think and ponder on this thought, even for a night, for a day, for a night or day, I see nothing to fear from it. So reflections like this strengthen the wholesome thoughts that have arisen. Does any of the Sri Lankan people, do you know the singular rendering of manasikara? No, it would take, I guess, a monk who's learned in this, in the scriptures to tell me. Yeah, I just have a vague recollection of it long ago, but it's a little more than a cloud in my mind right now. Okay, there's another passage that I thought could illustrate yoniso manasikara. So this is from the Buddha's advice to Rahula. Rahula at this time was his 7-year-old son. And so the Buddha is telling Rahula, whenever you want to do some action with the body, and the same as with speech, with mind, you should reflect upon that same bodily action thus. Would this action that I want to do lead to my own affliction, to the affliction of others, to the affliction of both? Is it an unwholesome bodily action with painful consequences, painful results? Okay, then if you know that this action one is contemplating doing would lead to one's own harm, the harm of others, the harm of both, then one should not do such a bodily action. But if you know, when you reflect, if you know this action won't lead to my own harm, the harm of others, or the harm of both, it's a wholesome bodily action with pleasant consequences, then you may do such an action with the body. Okay, so here, in both of these passages, we can see how yoniso manasikara functions as a kind of reflection on things that one is considering doing, actions that one is considering doing by way of body or speech. And it's a way of reflecting on thoughts that arise or might tend to arise in the mind. And so ayoniso manasikara, that is careless attention, careless reflection, or simply lack of careful reflection, will open up the gates for those thoughts and other mental states to arise in the mind. And they'll also open up the gates for a person to engage in the bodily actions or types of speech that are being motivated by those unwholesome thoughts, unwholesome mental states. Whereas yoniso manasikara, careful attention, careful reflection, then becomes a way of applying the brakes to the unwholesome states of mind, the brakes to unwholesome bodily and verbal action, and opening up the gates to wholesome states of mind, wholesome thoughts, and wholesome bodily and verbal actions. And so for this reason, the Buddha places so much stress on yoniso manasikara. As we'll see later, he says that it is he actually says that it is the chief internal quality for the arising of wholesome states of mind. And there's another passage where the Buddha says that yoniso manasikara is the chief internal factor for the arising of right view. And since right view is the first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, we could say even that yoniso manasikara then becomes the chief internal factor for the arising of the whole Noble Eightfold Path. And in this role, yoniso manasikara seems to have a different function, or a slightly different function, from that in the passages that I just quoted. In this passage where yoniso manasikara is the chief internal factor for the arising of right view, yoniso manasikara becomes the forerunner for wisdom. So here it's taking on the function of examining things carefully in order to understand and to see into their true nature. In fact, when there's a sutta in the Anguttara Nikaya where the Buddha is describing his practice, his contemplation of dependent origination leading up to his enlightenment. This is when he's seated under the Bodhi tree, contemplating in order to penetrate the obstructions of ignorance and to see things with wisdom. Then he says, Okay, he says here, let's take the first example. Yeah, so he says, as I was reflecting, this occurred to me. When what exists does old age and death come to be? What is the condition for old age and death? Then he says, Tasamai hung bhikkhave, yoniso manasikara ahu panyaya abhisamayo. So he says, as for me, through yoniso manasikara, through wise reflection or thorough reflection, careful reflection, there was ahu abhisamayo, a breakthrough, panyaya, with wisdom or through wisdom, that when there is birth, old age and death comes to be. Birth is the condition for old age and death. So in this passage, yoniso manasikara becomes, we could say, it's the preliminary stage to the arising of panya, wisdom. And then it's wisdom that makes the breakthrough, the abhisamaya. So in that function, we could say, from yoniso manasikara to wisdom, panya, to realization or the breakthrough. Okay, any questions now? I'll take any questions about this yoniso manasikara. Is that Stephen? Okay. Take the microphone.
Thank you. What is the difference between mindfulness and
Okay, that's a good question, but I want you to hold that question because we're going to come to another quality which is also closely associated with mindfulness and also seems very similar to yoniso manasikara. And so we're going to have a little maybe discussion about trying to disentangle these three qualities. So we'll see if we can, answer the question when we come to the next pair of terms. Okay, Anne, please take the microphone.
My question's about vitaka and vichara, the application of attention and the sustaining of attention. Is that attention that's referred to yoniso manasikara?
The vitaka and vichara.
Yeah.
Okay, vitaka and vichara is what, I translated as vitaka as thought, vichara as examination. So they have more specific, let's say narrower meanings in relation to meditation practice. These terms all seem to overlap, but the way and to have like echoes bouncing off from each other. But the way I understand vitaka in the meditative context, vitaka is the quality that directs the mind to the object. But it's a little different from manasikara. Manasikara, I'd say, is what turns the mind to a new object and which continually brings the mind back to the object when the mind strays. Vitaka is the quality that applies the mind to the object. It's so difficult to distinguish them. Some people say they can see in direct experience how to distinguish. For my mind, the distinction, it's a little blurry, but I think one could see vitakka as that would say one has put the mind onto the object, say the area around the nostrils, if one is doing mindfulness of breathing, anapanasati. So vitakka is what directs the mind to that sensation, that contact point of the breath. And vichara, I'd say, is what is examining to see that the mind is remaining on the breath, and that's examining the quality of the breath as the breath is coming in and out. So vitakka is like applying the mind, putting the mind there. Vichara is sort of looking to see the quality of the breath. Manasikara, in that precise function, is what turns the mind there. That's my understanding. Do you have the microphone?
Can I actually consider it as like a small episode of Vipassana?
As a small what?
Episode of Vipassana.
Small?
Vipassana.
Yeah, I got Vipassana. You said
It's
small?
a small episode. You know, like a small process for Vipassana.
A small process for Vipassana.
Yeah, because it seems like, you know, in Chinese Buddhism, there is a thing, if you have a volitional thoughts arising,
Yeah.
you actually contemplate, then transform into, turn into the right view.
Yeah.
So it seems like, to me, it's like, you know, that is kind of process.
I would say definitely that yoniso manasikara applied in particular situations can become like the preliminary to vipassana, or even an aspect of vipassana. But in this situation, I think in relation to preventing unwholesome mental states from arising and causing wholesome states to arise and to develop, I say that's, in that role, it's not a preliminary to vipassana, but rather it's just a preliminary to, in a broad sense, to mental cultivation, in a very broad sense. And also it's a factor, I would say, in that role, it can also be seen as representing the psychological side to sila, to moral conduct. Since it's this wise or careful attention that prevents one from engaging in morally transgressive action, and that keeps one within the range of wholesome action.
And also, it seems like you have to continuously doing the same thing, because the thoughts keep, arising.
Yeah.
So you have to keep doing this, all the time. Seems like
It's something that has to be maintained constantly, but one doesn't always have to maintain the careful reflection, careful attention in relation to the same mental states. But it goes very closely, actually now we come very close. We get yoniso manasikara in that role, something to maintain, to be constantly maintained, is getting very close to the next pair of qualities I want to discuss. So let's come to these pair of qualities now. So these, the negative is called lack of clear comprehension, and the positive quality is what I render as clear comprehension. And the Pali term, we'll just take the positive term, and then you could understand the negative is just the lack of it, is sampajanya. And sampajanya is based on the root nya, which means to know. And then from na we get the verb janati, one knows. And then here the verb would have two prefixes, some, which often indicates thoroughness, plus pa, which, it's a little bit like pa is a little bit like, these prefixes are a little bit like spices that one adds to a food. So they flavor the word, but often they don't give a different meaning to it. It's a little bit like eating dal, the Indian prepared lentils. You have turmeric in it, or cumin in it, and chili powder in it, so they flavor the dal. But the actual main flavor comes from the lentils themselves. So that is like janati is like the lentils, the sam and the pa are a little bit like the flavors. So sampajanya, it's a kind of knowing. So I've rendered it as clear comprehension, following some earlier translators. In the Chinese, they render it zhang zhe, is that correct? So zhang is right or correct, and zhe is knowing, correct knowing. And so you could see that sampajanya is close, it's very close to the quality, which means wisdom, which is panya. And wisdom is also from that root nya. It's from janati, with just the prefix pa. So sampajanya is, superficially it looks like a stronger form of panya, wisdom, but actually sampajanya comes in a more preliminary role, has a more preliminary role, whereas panya comes as the culmination of the practice. And sampajanya is often coupled with sati, which means mindfulness. And so we always get this pair, sati sampajanya. So even in the monasteries, when the teachers are training young monks, they'll say, you always have to act with sati sampajanya. If a monk seems sloppy in his behavior, they'll say, you don't have sati sampajanya. Develop sati sampajanya. So these two qualities, sati and sampajanya, go together almost inseparably. And we see this in the Satipatthana Sutta. In the passage that is considered the Udesa, the introductory passage of the Satipatthana Sutta, in relation to each of the four Satipatthanas, the Buddha says that the monk should dwell here contemplating the body in the body, atapi, ardent. Then we have sampajano. Sampajano is the adjective form related to sampajanya. So this is clearly comprehending, and satima means having sati, that is being mindful. So one dwells energetic, with clear comprehension, and with mindfulness. And so that's stated in relation to each of the four Satipatthanas. And then we have a stock passage on the training of the monk. the sequential, gradual, step-by-step training. Oops. Actually, this only explains it by way of sampajana, but there are other passages which explain that how is the monk one who has sati and sampajanya. So this is the passage that I have translated here. So he acts with clear comprehension when going forward and returning, acts with clear comprehension when looking ahead and looking away, when bending and stretching the limbs, when wearing the robes, carrying the robe and bowl, when eating, drinking, consuming food and tasting, even when defecating and urinating, when walking, standing, sitting, falling asleep, waking up, talking, and keeping silent. So in all of these activities, it said one is acting with clear comprehension. And whenever for clear comprehension to be present, mindfulness also has to be present. So that is why these two are inseparably conjoined. And so what is the relationship first between mindfulness and clear comprehension? How do we, separate them? I'm going to stand. Even though they go so close together. And this is the problem when you look to the suttas to find what is the difference between mindfulness and clear comprehension. There's a passage where the Buddha will say, what monks is, he says to the monks, you should be mindful and clearly comprehending. And how can you be mindful? And he says, you dwell contemplating the body and the body, feelings and feelings, mind and mind, dharmas and dharmas. How can you be clearly comprehending? You should be clearly comprehending when going forward and returning, when looking ahead and looking aside and so on. But you don't find in the suttas an explicit attempt to disentangle mindfulness as a mental quality from clear comprehension as a mental quality. Maybe when we try to disentangle them, we're going beyond what the texts actually intend. Maybe the text just intended them to be so closely intertwined that we can separate them. But like the Abhidhamma and the commentaries do explain them differently with but using fixed formulas, which the formulaic way of definition maybe is not so appealing to the modern mind, which wants sort of university textbook methods of definition and explanation. So this is the way I would disentangle the two. I might be wrong. Let us take the case of mindfulness of breathing. So mindfulness is that particular mental factor that keeps the object in mind. So mindfulness, the original sense of sati is remembering or recollecting. So mindfulness is what keeps the object in mind. So if one is focusing on the breath, mindfulness is what keeps the breath in mind. And maybe if the mind strays from the breath, mindfulness is what remembers that the mind has strayed, or that observes that the mind has strayed, and remembers to bring the mind back to the breath. Then sampajanya, as clear comprehension, when you're observing the breath, clear comprehension is what knows that the mind is on the breath. So it's the background knowing that the mind is on the breath. Mindfulness keeps the breath in mind. Sampajanya, let's say sati, keeps the breath in mind. Sampajanya knows that the mind is on the breath. Okay, let's broaden the scope of this distinction and bring it to everyday activities. So I would say mindfulness is the quality that that enables one to be aware of what one is doing. Well, let's say mindfulness is the presence of mind that accompanies whatever one is doing. So if if I'm speaking, when I do so with the awareness of speaking, it's mindfulness that makes me aware. Have I stepped into a into a swamp here? When speaking is a bit difficult, it's easier when walking. Easier to take walking as an example. So if I'm walking, mindfulness is that quality of mind that keeps my awareness on the walking. So when I walk, I want to say attentively, but then I'm likely to get into another trap. Okay, but I'll say when I'm walking attentively or with my presence of mind set up on the act of walking, that is mindfulness. And that which knows that I'm walking, and that knows, say, each step, when I'm doing a right step, left step, left step, that knowing of what I'm doing is, in this case, clear comprehension. Okay, it's interesting to see. Yeah, I was just going to raise that question. The difference between yoniso manasikara and clear comprehension. Let me go on to the next passage. It seems like I'm always trying to escape your question, but let's go on to the next passage that I have, which illustrates another function of sampajanya. Here we have them conjoined. He says, this is Nanda. He's speaking with reference to a monk named Nanda, who is the Buddha's own cousin. He says, this is Nanda's mindfulness and clear comprehension. Nanda knows feelings as they arise, as they remain present, as they disappear. He knows perceptions as they arise, as they remain present, as they disappear. He knows thoughts as they arise, as they remain present, as they disappear. And so I would say that even though the initial statement speaks about mindfulness and clear comprehension, but I'd say that the knowing here is the function of sampajanya, clear comprehension. It's the mindfulness that sort of opens up the field of awareness to and directs, opens up the field of awareness, makes the mind open, receptive, present to what is occurring. So it's that presence of mind that opens up to the feelings, to perceptions, to the thoughts, but it's the sampajanya that knows the feelings in each of their stages as they are rising, while present, while passing away. Same with perceptions, with thoughts. Okay, now coming to clear comprehension, its relation to manasikara. I would say, and this is just a conjecture, that manasikara is a more active state of mind, a kind of reflection or consideration that arises in relation to the unwholesome states, the wholesome states. So the word manasikara is actually from manasi, which means in the mind, and kara, activity. So it's an activity in the mind that is yoniso, that is thorough, that proceeds from the root up through the manifestations. And so as I said, it's very difficult to disentangle or to distinguish these subtle mental states. But I say that sampajanya has, as we see here, more the function of knowing, being discerning. Even we could use the word discernment maybe for sampajanya. And manasikara is the reflective activity, a kind of investigation into an examination, an investigation into the unwholesome and wholesome qualities of mind in its role of preventing unwholesome states from arising and bringing wholesome states into being. And then in relation to examining the nature of things, it's this manasikara, yoniso manasikara, that inquires into the nature of things. In the passage I cited on dependent origination, it's yoniso manasikara that investigates what is the condition for old age and death, what is the condition for birth, for bhava, for existence. And so through each of the other links in dependent origination. So manasikara, it's, I would say, of the three, it's the most active. Clear comprehension, this quality, the function of understanding or of knowing, is more prominent. And mindfulness is probably the most passive, the most laid back of the three, which has the basic function of being present to what is occurring, maintaining the presence of mind, or being the presence of mind, the openness of awareness. Okay, Anne, please take. Yeah, Anne here.
So would it be a fair shortcut to summarize it by saying sati and sampajanya is knowing what we're doing in a given moment,
Yeah.
and yoniso manasikara is knowing why we're doing it in a given moment?
I think that's a good way, yeah. But also, from the passages that I cited, yoniso manasikara also involves seeing into the consequences of what, say, mental states are occurring, and what the consequences will be if one acts upon those mental states. I think Stephen. And what is your name?
Paul.
You're Paul. I'm sorry, you keep on telling me, and then, okay.
Bhante, would it be fair to say that one might say the hallmark of yoniso manasikara would be to actually see these phenomenon as having the three marks of existence.
Okay, as having the three marks of existence.
To see down to the root that these things have those three qualities.
As being impermanent, dukkha, unsatisfactory, and non-self.
Yes.
Yeah, that is the way actually yoniso manasikara is defined I think the definition might even start in a book of the Abhidharma Pitaka, and then it's carried through into the commentaries. It seems to me that in the passages that I cited, where we're doing a moral reflection, a reflection with an ethical significance, to prevent the unwholesome, to arouse the wholesome, it seems to me that that examination of the three marks is not very prominent there, but it's more the examination of the effect of these mental states on myself, the effect on others if I act upon them. But when we come to manasikara as a preliminary to vipassana, or even maybe as part of the process of vipassana, then it will take on the meaning of investigating, inquiring into the three characteristics.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll take one more question with Paul, then I have to get back because I want to finish this section today.
This is in fact a comment. I was wondering if maybe all three of them, they're all together. In the sense that one is the active one and and then you have another one which are semi-passive and then one which is passive.
Oh,
like one, so there are three elements like in a triangle, all three present in.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, all three are present, and they seem to, as I say, to overlap and to some extent, to bounce back off each other. But it's with very thorough examination, we can distinguish them in certain ways. But let us move on, because I want to finish this particular section today. Okay, so now we come to, so far all of the qualities that we've been mentioning are largely internal qualities. But now we come to a pair, bad and good, which are external in a sense. It's unfortunate that the way the suttas are numbered, a sort of chapter subheading comes between 70 and 71. That's only because they use this scheme of grouping 10 suttas together to make a chapter. But 70 and 71 go together. Here the text says, I do not see even a single thing that so causes unarisen, unwholesome qualities to arise and arisen, wholesome qualities to decline as bad friendship. So when one associates with bad friends, unwholesome qualities arise and arisen, wholesome qualities decline. And then the opposite of this, I do not see even a single thing that so causes unarisen, wholesome qualities to arise and unarisen, unwholesome qualities to decline as good friendship. So one who associates with good friends, for that person, unarisen, wholesome qualities arise and unwholesome qualities decline. So this is a very, very significant statement from the Buddha. Maybe particularly in relation to the fact that in the Buddha's time, for many of the ascetic groups, the spiritual path was conceived as a very, solitary path, a path that one pursues by abandoning all human associations or connections and just going off into solitude and pursuing one's own awakening or realization. But in fact, within Buddhism, there is almost a model of that kind of path, which is called the path of the Pacceka Buddha or Pratyeka Buddha. This is conceived as the model of an ancient type of ascetic who pursues the quest for enlightenment alone, and then when on realizing enlightenment, doesn't make the effort to teach and to guide others, but continues to live in seclusion, and maybe at the most will just give general instructions on morality to lay disciples. But the Buddha, by emphasizing this quality of Kalyana-mita, good friendship, spiritual friendship, laid down the foundations for establishing a broad spiritual community of people who are associate, connect with each other, and pursue the same path. And this quality of Kalyana-mita, it has different dimensions, different aspects. And earlier I distinguished two aspects of Kalyana-mita, of the good spiritual friend. Okay, one aspect is what I would call the vertical aspect of good friendship, the other the horizontal aspect. Okay, in the vertical aspect of good friendship, the good friend is somebody who functions as a teacher, an advisor, a mentor, somebody who is accomplished in the spiritual path and that one turns to for instruction and guidance. And this role, or this meaning of good friend, becomes maybe more prominent. Well, we see it taking on a prominent role in the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification, where the expression Kalyana-mita is used in relation to the meditation master. So it's said that one approaches the Kalyana-mita, the good friend, in order to receive the meditation subject, and then to receive guidance or explanation of the meditation subject. Okay, the other aspect of good friendship is what I call the horizontal aspect, and this is the friendship that forms between people who are following the path together and then relate as friends in order to study the Dharma together, to practice together, to share their insights, their enthusiasm, their understanding together. So in this relationship of good friendship, there's not necessarily, superiority of one to the other, not necessarily a relation of mentorship, but as where people encourage one another, practice together, and unite their minds and hearts in their dedication to the path. Okay, so I said earlier I distinguished two aspects, but then I thought that there might also be a third, a third aspect. No, not going down. Excuse me? Well, I said horizontal is this way. That is the way between people roughly at the same level. The vertical is between the master and the pupil. But maybe the third aspect is the diagonal, where there's somebody who might be still in the role of student in relation to the teacher, but this is like the more advanced student who will give encouragement, advice, guidance, instruction to the students who are at a more elementary, more primary stage. Okay, let us look just at some passages. I selected a few texts to illustrate the meaning of Kalyana-mita. Okay, first here, this is a general statement. Even though here the expression Kalyana-mita is not used, but here the Buddha is saying that persons are twofold, those to be associated with, those not to be associated with. So to distinguish them, if one knows of a person, when one associates with this person, unwholesome qualities increase, wholesome qualities decline, then one shouldn't associate with such a person. So that's the person that one could consider actually the expression is used, pāpamita, the bad friend, or the friend that leads one downwards. Then when one associates with another person, unwholesome qualities decline and wholesome qualities increase. Then one should associate with such a person. So that's just a general way to distinguish who is a bad friend, who is a good friend. And even within the monk's life, we have experiences like this. Like I remember you think monks are always good friends, people to associate with. And I've associated with people that I would consider basically good monks, but sometimes they have a rather critical view of other people, say, in the monastic community. So they're always criticizing, in private. They'll come to me and say, did you ever observe this one's conduct? No good. That one looks so sloppy, no good. This one's a troublemaker, no good. And, he's basically a sincere person, but I find, if I associate with him, then I'm looking at everybody with critical eyes. It's causing trouble in my mind. So instead of seeing the good qualities of the other people, it's like I'm putting on so I'm seeing everybody who looks a little bit darker now. So I realize, keep a little distance from people like that, or if you can, speak to them. But if I speak to that person, I know that next week I'm going to see him whispering to another person, and I'm going to be the target. Okay, so here we have a passage where Sariputta approaches the Buddha and says to him that, Bhante, this is the entire holy life, the entire spiritual life, good friendship. Then the Buddha applauds and says, good, good, Sariputta. Indeed, that is the entire spiritual life, good friendship. When a monk has a good friend, good companion, it is to be expected that he will develop and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path. So here, good friendship could be seen as either in the vertical dimension, the teacher that instructs one in the Noble Eightfold Path, or the diagonal aspect, that is the one who's a little more advanced, or maybe a lot more advanced, that instructs one and helps one. Okay, here is a passage that says, I do not see even one other thing by which the unarisen Eightfold Path arises and the arisen Eightfold Path comes to fulfillment as good friendship. Okay, here are 7 qualities that indicate a good friend. He's one who gives what is hard to give, does what is hard to do. By this, it doesn't mean that he walks on a high wire across the Grand Canyon or whatever, but he sacrifices himself on one's behalf. He patiently endures what is hard to endure. He reveals his secrets to you, preserves your secrets, does not forsake you when you're in trouble, and he does not roughly or harshly despise you. Okay, so what is good friendship? So the Buddha says you should associate with those who are accomplished in faith, sila, good behavior, generosity, and wisdom, converse with them and hold discussions with them. And you should emulate them in respect to their faith, good behavior, generosity, and wisdom. Okay, so this takes us through, I think we've covered all the pairs of qualities except, except the last pair, which to my mind is not really laying down another pair of qualities that are aids to the wholesome, but it's really just indicating that in order to obstruct unwholesome qualities and to develop wholesome qualities, you need the intention to to remove the unwholesome qualities and to develop the wholesome qualities. So the word used here in Pali is anuyoga, which of course it's a prefix form of the word yoga, which in its original sense was that of yoking oneself to something. So in this case, one is yoking oneself to that intention to avoid the unwholesome and to develop the wholesome. Okay, I think we've come to the end of the section, to the end of our time here. So we could come back 12:30, since we have to walk down. You could take a little walk after lunch. So we'll have a little discussion period after the lunch. So if you have any questions, then keep them in mind and bring them back with you to the question session. Okay, so let us end with the sharing of the merits. So we share the merits with the devas, the Dhamma protecting deities, the nagas or dragon spirits, the bhutas or fair spirits, then with all of the world. Akasata chabumata Devanaga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditpa Chirang Rakantu Sasanang Akasata Chabumata Devanaga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditpa Chirang Rakantu Desanang Akasata Chabumata Devanaga Mahidika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakantu Mang Parang Etavatacham Hehi Sampadang Punya Sampadang Sabbe Devanumodantu Sabbe Bhutanumodantu Sabbe Satanumodantu Sabba Sampati Siddhya Pavakupadaya Vichihetato Etantare Satakayupapanna Rupya Rupicha Asanya Sanino Dukkha Pamuchantu Pusantu Nibuting.